On June 18, 2015, British Airways Flight 54 lifted off from Johannesburg, South Africa, an ordinary 747 headed for London on an 11-hour journey. But hidden deep inside the landing gear bay were two men clinging to the aircraft in silence, hoping to reach a new life. For hours, they endured thin air, deafening noise, and temperatures colder than Antarctica. And as the giant jet descended over London, witnesses on the ground saw a horrifying sight: a body falling from the sky, crashing onto a rooftop near one of the city's busiest railway stations. Yet when investigators opened the wheel well, they discovered something no one expected: a second stowaway, battered but somehow still alive. How could they have breached airport security and hidden inside a jumbo jet without being noticed? And what force of nature or miracle allowed one of them to survive conditions that should have been instantly fatal? Welcome to Sky Investigations, where every hidden corner of the sky holds a deadly secret. Case number 1, British Airways. 54, Johannesburg, London, 2015. On June 18, 2015, the bustle of OR Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg was nothing unusual. Passengers queued for long-haul departures, and among them was British Airways Flight 54, a scheduled service to London Heathrow operated by a Boeing 747-400. To the hundreds of passengers boarding that evening, the flight promised a routine journey 11 hours in the air, northbound from the southern tip of Africa to one of Europe's busiest hubs. But 2 additional passengers had already boarded, and they weren't on the manifest. Hidden deep inside the landing gear bay, 2 young men from Mozambique, Carlito Vale and his friend, known publicly only as Justin, had slipped through the airport's perimeter and climbed into the dark, narrow space above the giant wheels. They carried no passports, no tickets, and no luggage. What they carried instead was hope, the desperate hope of a new life in Europe. When 54 thundered down the runway and lifted into the night sky, the conditions inside the wheel instantly turned hostile. Noise. The roar of 4 Rolls-Royce engines was deafening, a wall of sound so violent it could disorient a person within minutes. Vibration. The aircraft shook as it accelerated, the massive undercarriage retracting upward, crushing the 2 stowaways into a space barely large enough to curl up in. Airflow. Outside, freezing air tore past at hurricane speeds. As the jet climbed to 38,000 feet, the environment became uninhabitable for humans. At that altitude, temperatures plummet to -50 to -60 degrees Celsius, colder than Antarctica. Oxygen levels are so thin that even elite mountaineers on Everest require bottled air. The wheel bay is unpressurized. There is no heating, no oxygen supply, and no protection against hypothermia or hypoxia. Within minutes, Carlito and Justin likely lost consciousness. Most wheel-well stowaways die long before the aircraft ever reaches its destination. But this flight would be different. As the Boeing 747 crossed the African continent, passed over the Mediterranean, and entered European airspace, the 2 men remained in their hidden compartment. From the perspective of aviation medicine, their survival chances were almost zero. Studies show that at cruising altitude, the human brain can only function for 2 to 3 minutes without oxygen before unconsciousness sets in. Exposure to extreme cold can freeze exposed skin in seconds. Yet somehow, Justin's body endured the full 11-hour flight. Doctors later speculated that his survival might be explained by a rare physiological effect. Extreme cold could have induced a state of deep hypothermia, slowing his metabolism so drastically that his body required far less oxygen than normal. It was, in effect, a state of suspended animation, the same phenomenon that occasionally allows drowning victims in icy water to be revived after far longer than expected. Carlito, however, would not be so fortunate. As dawn broke over southern England, British Airways 54 began its descent into Heathrow. For the stowaways, this was the moment of truth. At 0800 hours, as the aircraft lowered its landing gear over Clapham, southwest London, tragedy struck. Witnesses on the ground saw a horrific sight: a human figure falling from the sky, tumbling thousands of feet before crashing onto the roof of a residential home on Offerton Road, not far from Clapham Junction, one of the city's busiest railway hubs. The man was Carlito Vale. He died instantly on impact. Back at Heathrow, ground staff inspected the aircraft and made a shocking discovery. Inside the wheel bay, battered, unconscious, and close to death, lay Justin. Justin was rushed to hospital in critical condition. His body temperature was dangerously low, and he had sustained severe injuries from the ordeal. Doctors described his survival as astonishing. At an altitude of 38,000 feet, the human body should not last more than a few minutes without oxygen. At minus 60 degrees Celsius, frostbite and organ failure are inevitable. And yet, Justin had survived more than 10 hours in one of the harshest environments on Earth. In interviews years later, he recalled little beyond brief flashes of consciousness. "I passed out with the lack of oxygen," he said. "The next thing I knew, I was in hospital." Carlito, his companion, had not been so lucky. His dream of a new beginning ended violently in the streets of London. The discovery sparked an immediate investigation by London's Metropolitan Police, with assistance from the UK Civil Aviation Authority and officials in South Africa. Two urgent questions had to be answered. Who were the men? How did they breach security at one of Africa's busiest airports? For days, authorities struggled to identify them. Eventually, fingerprints and testimonies suggested both men were from Mozambique. Later reporting confirmed their names: Carlito Vale, the victim, and Justin, the survivor. Attention then turned to Johannesburg's O.R. Tambo International Airport. Somehow the pair had managed to bypass fences, evade security patrols, and reach a British Airways jumbo jet without being noticed. The revelations were damning. If two civilians could penetrate restricted areas and hide in the undercarriage of a commercial aircraft, what might terrorists or criminals achieve under the same conditions? South African authorities admitted their perimeter security had failed. They promised reforms, tighter patrols, improved surveillance, and more rigorous inspections before takeoff. For Britain, the case was shocking. Newspapers described it as one of the most infamous stowaway incidents of modern times. For Londoners, the horror of seeing a body fall from the sky into a quiet neighborhood made the tragedy painfully real. For aviation experts, the event reinforced a grim truth: wheel-well stowaways almost never survive. A study by the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration reviewing documented cases between 1947 and 2015 found that survival rates were less than 25%. Most victims die from lack of oxygen or cold long before the aircraft reaches its destination. Justin was a rare exception, a living reminder of just how desperate some are to risk everything for the chance of a better life. For Carlito, there would be no second chance. His name was later memorialized in reports and documentaries, a symbol of the silent tragedies that unfold far beneath the surface of global aviation. This incident was not only an aviation security failure but also a humanitarian story. To some, it exposed vulnerabilities in airport safety. To others, it symbolized the extremes of human desperation, the willingness to endure unimaginable suffering for the possibility of opportunity in another country. In 2021, British media revisited the case in documentaries. Justin spoke publicly for the first time, recounting his ordeal and the haunting memory of losing his friend. The tragedy of Carlito Vale became known as the man who fell from the sky. 4 years later, it happened again. Same city, same neighborhood. Clapham, southwest London, but this time the stowaway had come from Nairobi. Once more, a human body would fall from the sky into an ordinary London garden. Case number 2, Kenya Airways, Nairobi, London, 2019. On June 30th, 2019, a sunny Sunday afternoon in Clapham, southwest London, seemed ordinary. Residents tended gardens, children played in backyards, and one man enjoyed the warmth of the day lying on a deck chair. Above, the familiar sound of aircraft engines hummed in the sky, nothing unusual for a neighborhood under the busy approach paths of Heathrow Airport. But at 1541, the tranquility shattered. Out of the clear summer sky, something plummeted toward the earth at terrifying speed. A body slammed into a garden, missing the sunbather by less than 1 yard. The impact was so violent that the man's body was almost unrecognizable. For the shocked residents of Clapham, this was not just another aircraft passing overhead. It was the end of a desperate journey that had begun nearly 4,500 miles away in Nairobi, Kenya. The victim had boarded Kenya Airways flight Kilo, Quebec 100, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, not through the jet bridge, but by crawling into the wheel well at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. Hidden above the massive wheels, he attempted the impossible: to survive a long-haul flight from Africa to Europe inside one of the most hostile spaces imaginable. The environment inside a wheel well is a nightmare, unbearable cold. At cruising altitude around 11,000 meters, that's roughly 36,000 feet, temperatures can plunge to -50 to -60 degrees Celsius, cold enough to freeze exposed skin and tissue within seconds. Oxygen deprivation. Air is so thin at that height that even trained mountaineers need bottled oxygen. A stowaway without protection will lose consciousness in minutes. Noise and vibration. The thunder of jet engines and the violent mechanical retraction of landing gear make it nearly impossible to stay conscious, let alone survive. Unpressurized conditions. Unlike the cabin, the wheel bay has no temperature control, no breathable air, and no safety features. It is designed only for hydraulics, wires, and wheels. For the unknown man, the odds of survival were close to zero. Aviation records show that only about 1 in 4 wheel well stowaways survive. Most die from hypoxia or hypothermia long before the plane reaches its destination. Kenya Airways, Flight Kilo, Quebec 100 departed Nairobi at 0919 local time, bound for London Heathrow. For the paying passengers, it was an 8-hour routine journey across the equator, over the Mediterranean, and into Western Europe.
Aboard.
For the stowaway, the ordeal began almost immediately after takeoff. As the Dreamliner climbed into the thin atmosphere, the wheel well became a death trap. Oxygen levels dropped, the temperature fell, and circulation to his brain and organs would have ceased within minutes. By the time the aircraft crossed into European airspace, he was almost certainly dead. His body remained in the compartment for nearly the entire journey, silent, frozen, and unnoticed until the aircraft prepared to land in London. Kenya Airways, Flight Kilo, Quebec 100 approached Heathrow. The pilots extended the landing gear. The doors to the wheelbase opened, exposing their hidden passenger to the slipstream. Seconds later, over Clapham, residents saw a horrific sight. Witnesses described a figure tumbling from the sky, arms flailing before striking the ground with devastating force. A neighbor told Sky News, "I heard a whomp sound. I looked out the window and there was a body in the garden. It was horrendous." Another witness recalled that the man fell just 3 feet from where a resident was sunbathing in his yard. Emergency services who arrived at the scene described the body as badly damaged by both the fall and the extreme conditions endured during the flight. It was a miracle that no one on the ground was killed.
He missed me by maybe
The stowaway's fall could easily have struck the sunbather or landed on a house, with even more devastating consequences. When the Kenya Airways Dreamliner landed safely at Heathrow, ground engineers inspected the aircraft.
What is this?
Inside the wheel well, they found a small rucksack, water bottles, and food supplies, items the man had carried in the hope of surviving the journey. The discovery confirmed what investigators suspected. The stowaway had boarded in Nairobi. Somehow, he had managed to bypass fences, security patrols, and cameras at Kenya's busiest airport to reach the aircraft unnoticed. The case was immediately taken up by the Metropolitan Police in London, working with Kenya Airways and Kenyan aviation authorities. Kenya Airways confirmed the man had likely climbed into the plane's landing gear at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. Airport officials in Nairobi came under intense scrutiny. If one man could breach the perimeter and reach an aircraft, what about others with more dangerous intentions? The Metropolitan Police treated the incident as a case of sudden death. They attempted to identify the victim, but without documents, fingerprints, or DNA records available in the UK. The process was difficult. To this day, the man remains unidentified. He is remembered only as the stowaway who fell from the sky. News of the tragedy spread quickly across British and international media. The Guardian, BBC, and Sky News all carried stark headlines. Body of suspected stowaway falls from plane over London garden. The public was horrified not only by the gruesome imagery, but also by the desperation it represented. Commentators noted that this was not an isolated incident. Heathrow has recorded multiple cases of stowaways falling from aircraft over the decades. For many, the Clapham tragedy became a symbol of the broader crisis of irregular migration from Africa to Europe. The man's actions reflected the same desperation that drives thousands to risk their lives crossing deserts, seas, and borders in search of opportunity. His choice of hiding place a space with almost no chance of survival underscored just how hopeless his situation must have been. For the residents of Clapham, the event was deeply traumatic. One neighbor told reporters that the body landed with such force that it destroyed part of the garden, scattering debris across the lawn. Others described the smell and the horrific sight of the remains. Kenya Airways expressed regret and extended sympathy, noting the tragedy highlighted the dangers of stowing away and the vulnerabilities of airport security. The sunbather who nearly lost his life never spoke publicly, but friends said he was profoundly shaken by how close he had come to being struck. The Clapham stowaway incident was more than a local tragedy. It prompted international reflection on airport security. How did a man in Nairobi breach one of Africa's largest airports undetected? Migration pressures. What drives individuals to risk near-certain death in pursuit of a better life? Human cost. Beyond statistics, this was a real person with hopes, dreams, and desperation, now reduced to an anonymous body in a London garden. In Britain, the case reignited debates about immigration and border control. In Kenya, officials promised tighter airport perimeter patrols and surveillance. But for many observers, the core issue remained unchanged. As long as inequality and instability persist, people will continue to take unimaginable risks for the chance at survival and opportunity. These tragedies might suggest survival is impossible. And yet, in one of the most extraordinary stories in aviation history, a teenager in California defied every known law of medicine. Unlike London's stowaways, he didn't fall to his death, he walked away alive. Case number 3, Hawaiian Airlines flight, San Jose, Maui, 2014. On April 20th, 2014, the morning at Mineta San Jose International Airport in California seemed like any other.
It was the start
Families lined up for Hawaiian Airlines Flight 45, a Boeing 767 bound for Maui, Hawaii. For most, it was the start of a vacation. 5 hours across the Pacific, a bridge from Silicon Valley to paradise. But hidden beyond the bustling terminal, past fences and cameras that should have kept intruders out, a boy was about to make a decision that would stun the world. He was just 15 years old, a Somali-born teenager living in the U.S. foster care system. Restless, troubled, and desperate, he slipped away from his foster family that morning. Instead of a boarding pass, he carried only a plan as reckless as it was impossible: to climb into the wheel well of a jetliner and hitch a ride to Hawaii. Before takeoff, security cameras later revealed the boy scaling the perimeter fence of San Jose Airport in broad daylight. He wandered the tarmac, remarkably unnoticed, weaving among hangars and taxiways. At one point, he walked directly past aircraft parked for service. The fact that no alarm sounded, no guards intercepted him, would later be called one of the most shocking lapses in U.S. airport security in years. Eventually, he found Hawaiian Airlines Flight 45 preparing for departure. As ground crews focused on cargo loading and pre-flight checks, the boy crept beneath the fuselage. He pulled himself into the narrow, grease-streaked recess of the left main landing gear well. There, surrounded by hydraulic lines and steel struts, he wedged himself into the shadows. Minutes later, the jet's engines roared to life. The massive 767 lumbered down the runway and lifted into the sky. At cruising altitude, what awaited the boy inside the wheel well was a nightmare beyond imagination. As the aircraft climbed past 10,000 feet, the air thinned. By 20,000 feet, oxygen levels had dropped to a fraction of what the human body requires. At 38,000 feet, where Flight 45 cruised for hours over the Pacific, the atmosphere was as hostile as the summit of Mount Everest, with no bottled oxygen and no protection from the cold. Temperatures outside plummeted to minus 60 degrees Celsius. The landing gear bay offered no insulation. Within minutes, the boy lost consciousness. His body slipped into hypoxia, then hypothermia. By all known medical logic, he should have died. Yet paradoxically, that same cold may have saved him. Experts later speculated that the extreme chill slowed his metabolism to near stasis, a kind of accidental hibernation. His body's oxygen demands dropped, buying him time that would otherwise have been impossible. The landing at Maui, 5 hours later, as Flight 45 descended into the lush skies of Hawaii. Ground staff prepared for a routine arrival. But what they saw as the 767 taxied to its gate was anything but ordinary. A figure dropped down from the wheel well, barefoot, dazed, and shivering. The boy staggered across the tarmac. Shocked workers rushed toward him. They expected a corpse. Instead, they found a living, breathing teenager, weak, dehydrated, his skin burned by frostbite, but alive. The boy was immediately taken to a Maui hospital. Doctors were astounded. Aside from minor frostbite and dehydration, he showed no serious injuries. Within days, he had recovered enough to walk unaided. For aviation medicine, his survival was almost incomprehensible. Experts had studied dozens of stowaway cases. Survival rates were below 25%, and most who did survive had been on much shorter flights. To endure 5 hours in a wheel well at cruising altitude without protective gear was, by all accounts, a medical miracle. The story dominated headlines worldwide. News outlets ran footage of the boy being stretchered from the tarmac, calling him the Miracle Stowaway. Public reaction was divided. Aviation professionals were horrified that someone could breach security so easily at a U.S. airport. Medical experts debated how he had survived, citing cases of induced hypothermia in emergency medicine. The public alternated between awe at his survival and alarm at what his success implied for airport safety. For many, the boy became the most famous stowaway of modern times. For Hawaiian Airlines, the incident was a shock, but not a liability. The airline had no way of knowing the boy was aboard. For San Jose Airport and the TSA, however, it was a reputational disaster. Within months, millions were invested in reinforced perimeter fencing, advanced motion detection cameras, increased patrols and staffing. Yet the questions lingered. If a 15-year-old could breach an airport and hide inside a jet, what could someone with more sinister intent accomplish? For the boy himself, life returned to obscurity. Reports suggested he was returned to foster care, shielded from the media. But his survival continued to puzzle doctors and captivate the public. The San Jose Stowaway case remains one of the most extraordinary survival stories in aviation history. Against all odds, a teenager endured one of the most hostile environments on Earth: thin air, crushing cold, and the mechanical chaos of a landing gear bay, and lived to tell the tale. It was, in every sense, a miracle. But it was also a warning that desperation can push people to unthinkable risks, and that even the most secure airports can harbor unseen vulnerabilities. For aviation, the lesson was clear. The wheel well is not a passage to a new life. It is a place of almost certain death. And yet, on that spring morning in 2014, for reasons science still struggles to explain, it was also a place where a boy slipped through the cracks of security, of probability, of mortality itself, and survived the impossible. Across all three incidents, one thread stands out. The aircraft wheel well is among the deadliest spaces imaginable. Built only for machinery and hydraulics, it offers no oxygen, no heat, and no protection. According to ICAO and FAA, fewer than 1 in 4 stowaways survive. At cruising altitudes of 35,000 to 38,000 feet, air pressure drops to 1/4 of sea level. Within minutes, hypoxia robs the brain of oxygen and causes unconsciousness. Simultaneously, temperatures plunge to minus 50 degrees Celsius or colder enough to shut down vital organs. Even if someone survives these extremes, the final danger comes when the landing gear deploys, flinging bodies into the sky. Survival is nearly impossible, yet a handful of stowaways have lived long enough to become medical mysteries. This case shocked Britain because it involved both death and survival. As the 747 descended into Heathrow, a man later identified as Carlito Vale from Mozambique, fell from the sky onto a London rooftop, horrifying residents. But when engineers opened the wheel bay, they found a second stowaway, known only as Justin, alive but critically injured. Doctors called it astonishing, suggesting the extreme cold may have slowed his metabolism into a state of suspended animation. The case exposed serious security failures at Johannesburg Airport and raised fears of what might happen if others with malicious intent exploited the same weakness. 4 years later, tragedy struck again in Clapham, southwest London. On a summer afternoon, a body plummeted into a garden, missing a sunbather by mere feet. Investigators confirmed the man had hidden in the wheel well of a Kenya Airways Dreamliner on its 8-hour flight from Nairobi. Inside the bay, crews later found a bag, food, and water-mute evidence of his desperate plan.
What is this?
The man remains unidentified, known only as the stowaway who fell from the sky. The case highlighted both the vulnerability of Jomo Kenyatta International Airport and the desperation that drives people to attempt such journeys, despite survival being almost impossible. In the United States, a Somali-born 15-year-old boy stunned the world when he breached security at San Jose Airport and stowed away on a Boeing 767 bound for Hawaii. For nearly 5 hours at 38,000 feet, science dictated he should have died from hypoxia and hypothermia. Yet when the plane landed, he staggered onto the tarmac alive. Experts called it a medical miracle. For the TSA and FBI, however, it was an embarrassment proof that even in the post-9/11 era, a teenager could slip past perimeter security and reach an active aircraft. Together, these cases reveal a brutal truth. The wheel well is not a passage to freedom, but a trap of near-certain death. They also expose repeated airport security failures from Johannesburg to Nairobi to San Jose, showing that desperation can breach even modern defenses with tragic or miraculous results. Though separated by continents and years, the three cases reveal the same deadly formula: causes of death. Hypoxia, lack of oxygen, causes unconsciousness in minutes. Hypothermia, extreme cold, shuts down the body's core functions. Falling hazard, many stowaways die when the gear doors open. Outcomes: fatalities, the Nairobi and Johannesburg attempts confirmed the grim odds. Rare survivors. In 2014 and 2015, survival occurred against all known medical expectations. Security scandals, each case revealed shocking failures in airport perimeter security. Johannesburg, Nairobi, and even San Jose in the United States. Social impact. In London, the sight of a body falling from the sky horrified an urban population. In Nairobi, the discovery of frozen migrants became symbolic of desperate migration pressures. In San Jose, the survival of a teenager underscored both human resilience and the fragility of airport defenses. In conclusion, these investigations revealed not just isolated tragedies, but a systemic pattern. Wheel wells are not escape routes, they are death traps. Survival is the rare exception, not the rule. Safety lessons. The three cases leave behind one undeniable truth. The wheel well is a death trap. It is a space designed for hydraulic lines, gears, and machinery, never for human survival. At cruising altitude, oxygen levels are equivalent to standing on the summit of Mount Everest without any supplemental air. Within minutes, hypoxia sets in, robbing the brain of oxygen. The body collapses, unconsciousness follows, and death is almost inevitable. Combined with temperatures plunging to -50 degrees Celsius and beyond, the wheel well becomes one of the most hostile environments on Earth. The second lesson is about airport security. From Nairobi in 2000 to Johannesburg in 2015 to San Jose in 2014, each case exposed glaring vulnerabilities in perimeter defenses. These men, and in one case, a boy, should never have been able to approach a wide-body aircraft on an active runway, much less climb inside unnoticed. The survival of the San Jose Stowaway was described as a miracle, but the real message was sobering. If a teenager can breach security and hide inside a Boeing 767, then so could someone with far more dangerous intentions. Finally, there is the lesson of public awareness. These stories, as tragic as they are, must be told. They are not tales of adventure or bravery, but of desperation and near-certain death. By bringing them to light, aviation authorities and the media can deter future attempts. Every individual considering this path must understand, survival is not just unlikely, it is almost impossible. The wheel well offers no escape, no new beginning, and no safe passage. It offers only silence, cold, and darkness. And for those who enter it, the odds of coming out alive are vanishingly small. Every year, more stowaways attempt the impossible, hiding in the shadows of jets that soar miles above the earth. Most never survive. A few do, but their survival is a haunting reminder of desperation, luck, and the razor-thin line between life and death in the sky. Would you take such a risk, knowing the odds? Stay curious, stay safe, and subscribe to Sky Investigations, where the black box is just the beginning.